Chapter 28 of Laughter Limited. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Jeremiah Sutherland, Victoria, British Columbia. Laughter Limited by Nina Wilcox Putnam, Chapter 28. When I come to, I was laying in my own bed, in my own room, with Mummer sponging my forehead with something cool and sweet-smelling, and a doctor I had never seen before, but he had a kind of face, well, he was saying something about overstrained nerves and a long rest. Now I'll tell the world that right up to the point of this doctor saying this mouthful, I had an idea nerves was something to be pulled as an excuse, and nothing more, and believe me, they are all too often only that. Nerves is mostly nonsense, but sometimes they do get overstrained, and it sure seemed like mine had, and I come to realize, through the week that followed with me that had never before been sick in my life, laying flat on my back, that maybe a rest now and then is as important to a person's business or artistic career as hard work is. Of course I had heard this remark made in the past, but on account of Pop being the one who made it, why I had not thought it could be true. So I just lay there quiet, seeing nobody except only Mummer, and allowing her to make up my mind for me on every little matter. And all those members of the public which their family has allowed them to take the entire responsibility and do all the dirty work of supporting the home and so forth, will at once realize how much I enjoyed being sick. And all this time Mummer wouldn't let me say one word about Stricky or the whole affair. But being a healthy person by nature and disposition, and a worker by habit, why, there come a day when the novelty wore off, and I wanted to set up and eat meat and hear the dirt. And it happened that this day Nichols come to see how was I. Of course he had done it every other day as well, but up to now I hadn't seen him, or Bert Green, or even Axel, and God knows nobody could rightly accuse Axel of being a mental strain, but Mummer would not let him up either. Each day Milt had called up or sent flowers and come to the house a lot, but him I would not have faced at any price just then. Well, this meat-eating day I am telling you about, Nicky come at the right moment. And when Mummer tiptoed in with some milk toast and the news that he was downstairs, I says for her to trade in them slops for a hunk of raw beef or something, and to send him right up, because my mind had commenced to work and I might as well try it out on him as anybody. "Oh, honey, I don't know should I let you," says Mummer. "They say when the devil is ill, the devil a saint will be, but I always say a ounce of prevention is better than a relapse." "Oh, send him up, Mummer, please," says I, "and I will promise not to sprain my mind." So Mummer says all right, and steered the bread and milk out again, and pretty soon Nicky come clumping up in the bashful way a decent bachelor has in a girl's sick room, and the nicer they are, the awkwarder. But he was awful glad to see me, and sat down at once on not alone the side of my bed, but my hot water bottle as well, only I wouldn't call his attention to it for fear of embarrassing him worse. And he took both my hands in his and kissed them, and couldn't say a word at first, so I tactfully and affectionately did. "Nicky dear," I says, "oh, but I am glad to see you. You are the only one I could talk to, and I just got to talk. I got such a lot of things I want to ask, and Mummer keeps giving me only a soft answer. And believe me, Nicky, this is one time it don't turn away wrath, but I dasn't let her see it." "Little Bonnie," says Nick, "you have given us such a scare. Are you better, really?" "You bet I am," I says, "and I just got to know what has been going on. I know Strickland didn't die, even Mummer told me that much, but what has he done? And Anita, where was she? Were the newspapers dreadful? Did they say terrible things about me? Oh, Nicky, tell me the whole truth. It will be so much easier for me if I know than it is to lie here imagining things." "Poor kid," says Nicky. "Of course I will. Well then, the papers aired the affair, of course. But they were all for you, Bonnie, and the way you responded to Anita's call for help. She did it, of course, no matter what Strickland says about the whole thing being an accident." "An accident," says I. "Of course that was it. I should have guessed. Go on, Nicky." "Well, when the good-for-nothing scamp came to in the hospital, he spilled the beans at first. He was mad at Anita, mad enough to have her arrested, but he reneged later. It appears that Anita was jealous of him, and that she was in debt up to her neck. Strickland had promised her $500 to keep her from being put out of her place, and then as usual he hadn't made good. He'd stalled her off for several days. The afternoon of the shooting, Anita came to see him desperate for her money. Kit Newt had thrown her over when she took up with Greg, and she was out of work. I suppose Strickland couldn't come across and they had a row. He now says Anita took his gun out of the top drawer of his bureau and threatened to kill herself and that he seized it. They struggled and the gun went off. At least that's his present version. He has told several, each more dramatic than the last, but he won't press any charge, and she has left town." "How dreadful," I says. "Where was Anita that afternoon when—" "They found her back in her room, full of hop," says Nicky. "She had the gun with her, and she was too dazed to even attempt getting away. Her creditors auctioned her furnishings yesterday. It's a nasty mess, little Bonnie, but it is behind you, remember that. You have got to put it out of your mind." "Somehow I don't see able to," I says. "Oh, Nicky, what's the matter with Hollywood? Why do we get in such messes?" "We don't generally," says he promptly and firmly. "The rotters do. And there are a few rotters in every profession, Bonnie. Our community, through its very nature, is more conspicuous, that is all." "I don't know that you are right, Nicky," I says earnestly. "I want to get away from this town for a while and think things over. I've had a big jolt, and I got to get myself straightened out. I want to go someplace where I'm away even from you and mommer and so forth, and where there is nothing to remind me of the studio." "You must do it then," says Nicky, understanding at once. "We will wait for you on the Scarlet Letter. You are not to come back to work until you are well." "Oh," says I, "the picture. We was right in the middle of it, wasn't we? But I can't come back just yet. I got to have a breathing spell." "I tell you what," says Nicky, "you go out to my ranch for a week. At least I call it that. In reality, it's just a shack down near Santa Ana, but over on the ocean side. It's miles from anywhere and is the place I run to when I need perspective. There's a nice old couple who live there and look after it for me, and I'll write them tonight. It's just the place you need." I looked at his kind, eager face and the tousled lion curls, and my eyes filled with tears like a regular sentimental dumbbell. To think I had such a grand friend! "Nicky, you are a peach, and I will accept," I says gratefully. "It will be like escaping into heaven." And it was. There is some people thinks California is Hollywood, and some that thinks it is San Francisco or Los Angeles, and yet again a few who admit there are groves and so forth. But the part of California which best expresses the spirit of it all is not the prosperous cities or orange trees or walnuts and grapes or good roads, though there are enormous crops of all these, but the naked rolling hills of California, which swell and fall in great smooth sweeps along the coast between the valleys and the sea. These hills is peculiar, I do believe, and like no others in the world. They are profoundly quiet, and though bare, are full of promise. They are open and plain to see for miles whichever way you look, and in the canyons between them there is great oaks growing clean and strong, small forests of ancient giants, as you might say, evergreen and tremendous once you are down among them, but seen from the bare crest of the nearest hill they seem a mere patch of darkness, or like the shadow from a cloud. And along the outer edge of these hills and canyons sweeps hundreds of miles of golden beach with them lace-fringed jade-green breakers breaking on them like I have told you before, and in the lonely places wild seabirds by the thousands, crying. But it ain't lonesome, none of it, because a person knows them treeless hills are so rich that you could grow roses on them anywheres. All through the dry season they are brown, and then like a miracle a week of rain will have them green as the far-famed ones of Ireland, only with the addition of golden poppies. And another reason why these vast hills is not a lonesome place. They are well proportioned. You don't feel lost in a big room if it is shaped right, and the same is true of these hills I am telling you about, and there is no use in you laughing and passing some remark to the effect that nature can't go wrong and so forth, because that is a big mistake, and nature has pulled a lot of boners, the same as any natural person does, but the California coast is a big success, and its beauty both rests and inspires a person, no matter how many times they see it. Well, anyways, this ranch which Nicky loaned me was set on one of these hills like as per see above, and it was the very place I needed. I had trouble getting away from mommer, but finally I did, and for a week I rode the lonesome trails around the neighborhood of this ranch on Nicky's little old friendly pinto pony, or sat on the porch and watched the Pacific swallow the setting sun. And I thought, and each day things got clearer to me about what I had ought to do with the rest of my life. And the conclusion I come to was that I would have to leave the pictures. It was a terrible decision, and just what I would go to work at after I got out I hadn't decided. I couldn't see beyond the, as you might say, fatal step, but to continue working in the same business, on the same lot with Milton Sherrill, now that I was automatically put out of reach of ever being his wife, was impossible. Nobody had come near me during the time on the ranch, and I had not even had a letter from mommer. I had expressly wanted to be cut off entirely from the world, and things had worked out fine, for I now had my decision clear. I would go and see Milt and tell him that while I would of course finish the interrupted picture, it would have to be my last one, and I would beg him to let me out of the rest of my contract. End of chapter 28. Chapter 29 of Laughter Limited. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Jeremiah Sutherland, Victoria, British Columbia. Laughter Limited by Nina Wilcox Putnam. Chapter 29. The moving picture world is the only one where a lady can safely reminisce without its being a confession of age. To recall the days when Lillian Gish was knee-high to a vaudeville act is no sign a person is in any dotage, and even the ones who admit to remembering when Charlie Chaplin was only getting $500 a week don't necessarily have to be gray around the temples. And seeing that to be the true fact, why naturally I personally myself do not hesitate to publicly look back to the day of my interview with Milton and all that it has come to mean to pictures. Of course I got as much modesty as any other successful woman, but I can't help but realize that only for things working the way they done, why pictures would not be what they are today. Well anyways, I set out from Nicky's ranch alone in my car, my mind all made up to go right to the Silvermont lot and get things over and done with. For if a person has decided to have a tooth out, or take up a note, or any other painful operation, why it is a good plan to have it no sooner said than done, as the poet says, and so I didn't even go home to my Spanish fandango first, but merely telephoned Mummer that I was headed for the studio, made sure Milt was going to be in his office, and got on my way. Well, I'll tell the world I was as depressed as a cold waffle when I left the ranch. Sweet daddy, I'll say so, because here I was about to zinc my life ambition and so forth, and the nearer I got to Hollywood, the less I liked my duty, and the temptation to shrink it stole over me like a frost. As I went by the Mural lot, which was the first big studio that I had to pass on my way in town, my heart give a silent groan, as you might say, like a mother responding to her babe, and then it give a leap of curiosity because the mural was plainly closed. Well, well, I thought, ain't it remarkable how things changes in the pictures, and when you come back after being away for a week, why you never can tell who has failed or succeeded, and God knows maybe I will find that Axel is now a star, and I says this to myself because it was the most unlikely thing that I could imagine. The town of Hollywood itself was in one of its gay moods, too. It seemed to me I had never been there when it was so crowded with snappy people and bright clothes, and even the gardens looked like they had burst out into extra blooms just to get my goat. It all looked good in the way anything you are about to give up forever does, and any woman who has given away a dress or a hat, if nothing more serious, will at once understand my feelings. The usual herd of cars was crowded about the Silvermount curbs, and there sure was nothing shut up looking about that is their lot. Actually, it made me a little sore to see things going on much the same, and in fact a little more so while I was away and was, further, about to get out for good. Busy? Right then the Silvermount looked like the busiest place in America. A big crowd of extras was going off on a desert location, and Axel in an Arab costume waved to me from the middle of the bunch as I parked my car and headed for the office. Nicky grabbed me by both hands at the main entrance and then dusted away in a big hurry. Once inside and past the welcome of the office force, I could see Trixie Truman, with McGee directing, working over on number 4. They were making a drawing room sequence, and somehow the sight made me wild. Everywhere, all around me, the crowd was busy, hard at work, interested, and suddenly the full realization come over me that all this had been going on while I was away, and would continue to go on after I had left. And at the thought, something inside my mind got up on its hind legs and hollered, and it was all I could do to keep the tears of self-pity out of my eyes. Now, B. McFadden, I says to myself, you keep steady. Your mind is made up, a real decision that was 2 weeks in growing. So don't you go letting any momentary jazz upset the whole business. And then, feeling considerably stronger, I went along to Milton's office and says to the outside girl, can I see him? And she says yes, in a moment, he is busy. And actually I had to set and wait, and this didn't make me a whole lot happier either. Sweet daddy! I could actually feel my strength of mind running out the end of my fingers and toes. It made me wild to sit there like a dumbbell applying for her first job or something, and I wanted to show them I was somebody. Then I again remembered I was getting out, and that a year from now nobody would even remember who I was or anything. Well, in the middle of these happy thoughts, Slim Rolf come out of the Teakwood Temple and says, hello, Bonnie, glad you are back, and so forth. And then I actually got permission to go in to see Milt. And when I got in, he was alone but talking on the telephone, and so merely give me a gesture to sit down, which I did, mad clean through. And then I waited and waited while Milt listened and says, yeah, no Al, yeah, for what seemed about a year. Then at last he hung up. "Well, B," he says, "I say this is fine. You look wonderfully, and it does my eyes good to see you back again. Are you absolutely all right?" "Yes, Milt," I says firmly. "I am righter than I've been in a long time. So right that I—" "Great, great," he interrupted me, slapping the arms of his chair and springing up. "Able to come back to work tomorrow?" "Yes, Milt," I says. "I can come back and get this picture finished right away, but then we are going to put you over really big," says Milt. "Look here, B, do you remember that picture you made with Nichols, alias Cinderella?" Did I remember it? Sweet daddy! "Say, listen, Milt, are you cuckoo?" I says. "I guess my memory is that long all right. I'm hardly likely to forget that one time I was a star." "Well," says he, deadly serious, "it is a great picture. I saw it last week up at Fresno, and I have bought it in cheap. We are going to call it The Stepchild and release it as a new issue with you as the star. We will spend a lot of money on it, and it will be the picture of the year. Why, it's a great picture, I tell you, B, and you certainly have a wonderful future." What do you know about that? I felt kind of limp and weak and floored. Nicky's picture! How things did work around in circles for sure. Poor Nicky, after all his labor, the result would appear as a Silvermont release. It wasn't fair, and yet it couldn't be helped, for apparently that was the way the picture business was always done. I felt sick over it, and I tried to tell Milt so. But as he sat there, his handsome face all alight with excitement and interest, why, what I had come to say wouldn't quite reach my lips. "I had no idea you could act as you did in that picture," Milt was saying. "Why, child, you are amazing." Then he pulled a line which at first I couldn't realize that he had said it, and thought, well, I guess I didn't hear right. "And it's not only because I love you that I think you are a great actress," says he. I could only stare at him without a word. He got up and come over and sat beside me on the window seat, which is where I was. "B. McFadden, don't tell me that you are surprised," says he. "You must have known it all along. Why, I have loved you since that very first day on the train. When will you marry me, dear?" Well, I got considerable respect for my public, and of course will admit they got a right to know all about me up to a certain point, beyond which they can go no whicher. Also, I realize that a public person and great artist has no private life and so forth, but there is a limit to even that just the same, and refinement compels me to draw the line someplace. And that place is the rest of what I and Milt said and did after the above sequence, and I am not going to give you the conventional full close-up. Anyways, the censors have taken to timing them close-up kisses and would surely have cut ours down. Well, anyways, after a time-lapse subtitle of later, Milton and I commenced to get sensible, and then I told him what I had come in to say in the first place. "Dear," I says, "I will marry you any time you say. But oh, Milt, I want to get out of the pictures, now more than ever." "Why?" says he. "What is on your mind about them, honey?" "Well," says I don't quite know. But they are a rotten game, Milt. Not healthy somehow. A great art, yes, I will admit that. But working in them does something awful to people. Can't you see it yourself? It's like a poison, and it demoralizes them pretty nearly all." "I know what you mean," he says, frowning over it. "Yet that should not be necessary. You mean the lax living and thinking which one falls into so easily out here. Sometimes I believe that this semi-tropical climate is as much to blame as the pictures are." "Well, the combination of the two is hard on ordinary mortals with only average morals," I says. "I don't know do I want to waste my energy fighting the something that is in the air here, darling. I was brought up in New England, Milt, and so was you, hun, and there is something in this outfit as a whole that goes against us and what we was taught to believe was decent and right." "I know," he says thoughtfully. "Before I come here today," I says, "I had made up my mind I was through, for more than one reason. And now I want to be just your wife, hun, and to make you a good home and lay off of acting. And I don't want to do it in Hollywood either, but in our own kind of atmosphere where we belong." "Dearest," says Milt. Later, that's another time lapse, see? "You are dead right," says he. "We don't belong in this game, and we will get out. Why, don't you remember how opposed to the pictures I was when you first met me? I told you I hoped never to touch them. Well, I was right, you see. And although this sounded a little prematurely married, as you might say, why, I let it go and smiled at him in agreement. Why, hun, being married to you will use up all the talent I've got," I says, laughing. "And if I can act the part of a good wife, why, I will be perfectly satisfied. I'm just sick of these parts where I have to vamp, and of going for my recreation to parties where they mix the cocktails in a washing machine. And I am tired of being out of my element, too," Milt declared. "Where shall we live, B? Name the place and you shall have it." "Oh, Milt," I says, slipping my arms around his neck. "How about Stonybrook? Your dear mother's house would be the ideal home for the both of us, dear, and living in it would help us cling to our ideals. "Bonnie, would you really?" says Milt. "You blessed child, nothing would make me happier than to call the old place home once more." Well, that was all settled, and the anxious reader can write in another time lapse, and then consider that I have broke away again because of something very important occurring to me. "Milt," I says, "what do you know? I had for the minute forgotten all about mommer." "I should hope you would," says he, laughing. "Such things are allowable at these times, surely, and after all, she is not your real mother, you know." "But I love her, Milt," I says earnestly. "Perhaps I love her even more than I would if she was the genuine article. You see, I could never afford to fight with her like I might have done if we had been relatives. So we have shown each other only our best sides and are more than mother and daughter because we are friends. And I can't go back on her now. I can't desert her, Milt, when I marry you." "Well," says Milt, "Mrs. Delane is a fine woman, B, and I will never forget what she has done for you, dear. If you wish her to make her home with you, I won't oppose it." "Oh, Milt, you are too wonderful," I says. "I just couldn't endure to think of Adele spending a lonely old age, and of course she has got no one but me. What a lovely time we will have out of the pictures in our old New England home with mommer and everyone." "Except Pop," says Milt. "I draw the line at Pop." "And so do I says. Pop has simply got to learn to work for his own living, and you must back me up and refuse to help him." "I will," says Milt firmly. Well, everything was beautifully settled by then, and I felt as if I was in a trance or a happy dream or something, and it was sure a great relief to know that soon we would be leaving all this behind us and so forth. And then all at once, like approaching thunder, there was footsteps pounding down the hall as if a elephant had broke loose from our animal department, and the teakwood flew open and in rushed Big Benny with neither coat or, for once, any cigar in his face, and what little hair he had was sticking up wildly with excitement. The big egg was all red in the face, and for the first few moments he couldn't speak a word, but only blow and wave his hands in a few wild native gestures. "What do you think?" he gasped at last. "We can buy out Muro cheap. Only $17 million. Oi, such good news!" "What?" exclaimed Milt, all excited too. "Only 17 millions? Why, that's throwing it away." "Sure it is. What you think I got such excitement over it for, else?" says Benny, wiping his streaming face. "Say, listen, for 3 years I've been trying for a merger with them people, and now is our chance. Why, it's the opportunity of a lifetime. When we got this combination, believe me, we will rule the industry." "That's so, Ben," says Milt. "Why, man, it's the biggest thing in years. With their lot and ours combined, we could make some super productions that would knock the eye out of these German pictures, and the clear field it would give us. Say, listen, does Muro himself want to stay in?" "Sure he does," says Benny. "He's in my office now, waiting." "If he wants to come to us," says Milt intently, "that means it's the real thing. If he was merely offering to sell out, I wouldn't trust the crook. He'd probably intend floating something new. And with the Muro releases as well as our own," says I breathlessly, "look at the field a star would have. Twice the ordinary publicity." "You sure would have it, honey," says Milt. "By heaven, I didn't have any idea you would really be able to pull the trick, Ben. I congratulate you." "Congratulate also yourself," says Benny, as the two of them shook hands like a couple of crazy schoolboys. "As the financial head of the concern, Milton, believe me, you got the greatest future in the industry, and I must say you are a wonderful manager." "Ben, you are a marvel," says Milt, and they regularly danced around at that while I stood with my hands clasped tight on my chest, watching them and thinking, my God, but Mary Pickford has never had half the advertising which I will get from this merger, and won't I just work like a hound so as to deserve every little bit of it too. And then pretty soon them two clowns come down to earth, and Milt turned back to the big egg real serious. "Benny," he says, "there is something even more magnificent than this merger which I am to be congratulated on. Bonnie is going to marry me, old timer." "So?" says Benny, beaming. "Well, that is certainly grand news. I do congratulate the two of you, and am glad I was able to bring it such a fine engagement present like I done just now, and to know the big merger will be all the stronger for keeping the both of you in it." Well, when Big Ben pulled that line, why all at once I and Milt exchanged a look like a couple of sheep. And it is God's truth that up to the very minute, Stony Brook and the old home and our pure and domestic future had been wiped right out of our mind. Our spontaneous joy about Muro had showed up the both of us pretty clear, too, because it proved what was closest to our hearts. And sweet daddy, didn't we feel like a couple of fools, though. But being engaged to be married had already filled me with the conventional sense of wifely sacrifice, and so I hurried to find an excuse and volunteered to be the goat and save Milton's pride and so forth. "Milt," I says, "haven't you practically promised to sign that contract to stay on here?" Well, yes, I practically had, says he, looking at the toe of his shoe. Well, I don't want to influence you any, hun, I says, but honest, I don't see how you can go back on them now. I suppose not, says Milt, but how about Stony Brook? My promise to you is even more important, Bee. Oh, that will be all right, I says hastily. You see, come to remember it, I got a contract all signed to myself for 2 more pictures with this concern, and I couldn't hardly break that now, could I? Why, see here, hun, I wouldn't dream of asking you to do any such thing, Milt declared indignantly. And as of course I wouldn't attempt to go against his will in anything, why that settled matters and we mutually understood that we was to stay. While all this was going on, Ben stood looking from one to the other of us, rubbing his hands nervously. Say, listen, says he, you wasn't thinking about quitting for heaven's sake. What nonsense! I think perhaps it was nonsense, Milt admitted to him. But I will sign that contract, Ben, for, let us say, 3 years, and we will close with Muro at once. When my contract and B's run out, then will be time enough to decide whether we want to go on in the pictures or not. That means you are in them forever, says the Big Egg enthusiastically. And with them words of wisdom he rushed off to catch Muro's mind while it was still that way. When the door had shut behind him, I come over to Milt, and putting my hands on his shoulders, I looked him square in the eyes. Dear, I says, we don't kid ourselves. Once in the pictures, always in them. Isn't that so? I expect you are right, B, says Milt. And after all, they are the greatest game on earth today. I'll be honest about it. I want to stay. So do I cried. Oh, Milt, together we will make the greatest pictures the country has ever seen. On a clean lot, says Milt. With no favorites, says I. And no graft, says Milt. With square finances, I sang. And sane salaries, Milt went on. And a home in Hollywood, says I. With a swimming pool and a projecting room, yelled Milt. And Mummer to live with us, says I. Yes, I suppose so, says Milt. And at that very minute we realized somebody was knocking on the door, and who would it be, speaking of angels, but Mummer herself. From the way she entered the room I at once seen something out of the ordinary was up, for not alone did she close the door after herself in a mysterious manner, and then take up a commanding position, but commenced mugging at us in an attempt to register the possession of a big secret. But I was in no mood for any nonsense, so I just flung myself at her and give her a big kiss on each cheek. Oh, Mummer, darling, I says, what do you think? I and Milton are going to be married. My land, says Mummer, you don't expect me to be surprised at that, do you? But I'm real glad, hun, honest I am, although now of course you'll be through with me. They say it's an ill wind that blows nobody good, but I'll say not when it blows out the last match. Now, Mummer, I says tenderly, don't you pull any pathetic stuff about being a last match, because we are not going to let you go. You are coming to live with us. No, Bonnie dearie, I'm going to do no such thing, says she promptly. You certainly are a good daughter to me, the best I ever had, in fact. But I always say it's a wise child who knows when to go no further, and I got other plans for myself. Why, Mummer, says I, drawing away from her. And as I got a full-length view of Mummer, I realized for the first time the big change in her appearance. For gone was Mummer's long skirts and modest dark colors. She was dolled in oyster gray satin up pretty near to her knees, and high-heeled slippers and silk stockings to match, and a snappy little hat of yellow flowers perched on the one side of her stylishly dressed hair. How I had come not to notice all this first shot can only be accounted for by me being blind and selfish, like most folks in love. Why, Mummer, I says, gasping, how sweet you look, and how snappy. Mummer blushed like a girl and backed off towards the door. With her hand on the knob, she gave a dramatic pause. I got a little surprise for you all, she says, and I guess I will now bring it in. And with that she pulls open the teakwood, and in walks Pop. Well, I had been sort of prepared for it to be him on account I am no dumbbell, or blind either, but I was far from expecting the Pop which showed. As he come into the room, I could scarcely believe my eyes, for if Adele was dressed up like a peahen, believe me, Pop was like a peacock, and then some. From the crown of his green plush hat, which was set jauntily on the one side of his varnished hair, to the soles of his natty shoes with the pearl gray spats, Pop was some plush horse. He had a gardenia in his buttonhole and a 2-carat stone in his tie, and the smile on his face was as smug as the Sphinx itself. Well, well, Bonnie dearie, says he, swinging in and parking a huge silver-mounted cane on Milt's desk, along with his new yellow gloves and his lid. Well, well, all. I expect maybe you are surprised at your old Pop now, hey, daughter dear? And you, Mr. Sherrill. Sure, it's a real treat to meet you on equal terms at last. Pop, says I, for heaven's sake explain. And as for equal terms with Milt, you need not think you can sass him just because I am going to marry him. "Miriam, are ye?" says Pop genially. "Is that so? Well, well, now I couldn't have chosen better for ye myself." "Thank you, Mr. McFadden," says Milt. "Sit down, everybody, do." "Pop, don't be a fool," says I. "Those clothes, that pin, if you took them from Adele, I'll murder you, that's all." "From Adele," says Pop with dignity. "Daughter, I am surprised at your injustice to your parent. Sure, I bought them things with my own money." "My God," I says feebly. "It's the truth," chimed in Adele. "He did, honey. They have found oil on his ranch." "Pop," says I feebly. "To think of that, you to strike oil and get rich after all your laziness. It's too much." "Daughter," says Pop slowly and with great dignity, "I don't know why you are doubtful of me the way you are. It has been hard work getting this fortune of mine, and all your life I've told ye I'd do it some day." "Oh, the poor man," Adele broke in. "What he says is true, dear. He actually did go to work on that real estate proposition and cleared the land with his own hands. Then he started drilling an artesian well to get a water supply for the lots and struck oil. It's a gusher," says Pop with extreme dignity. "Bringing me around $800 a day for the past week, and we got 2 more wells started." Suddenly he leaned over me, the realest look in his eyes I had ever seen there. "Bonnie," says he, "you told your old father the truth. And the very first time in my life I ever went to work made me a rich man." "And got him a wife," says Adele. "Oh, hon, we was married this afternoon, and I'm really your mummer now. I do hope it won't make any difference between us, dearie." "Adele," says I, "not much. With you really in the family, and Milton for my very own, I am as happy as a dumbbell." "Well," says mommer with a sentimental sigh, "they say there's nothing half so sweet in life as love's young dream, and I'll say they're right." End of chapter 29. End of Laughter Limited by Nina Wilcox Putnam.